You ever play a fighting game and just run through the whole roster for a test drive, only to find that multiple characters play similarly to characters in another game? This is because of the age-old concept of fighting game archetypes, essentially the basic playstyles that can be found across most fighting game characters. I'm assuming that most people watching this video have a basic understanding of the concept, your grapplers, your zoners, your shotos, all that stuff. Well, in my time playing Last Blade 2, I noticed something strange. Quite a few characters on paper had the tools of your average archetypes, but weirdly deviated from those playstyles when you actually dug into it. For a while, I wondered why that is, and this is the answer I came up with. Of course, that means this video is going to be more focused on my personal observations rather than hard facts, and I'm not exactly the most qualified person when it comes to this game, so take this video with a grain of salt. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk archetypes. First, let's use the most basic archetype as an example, the classic Shoto. A Shoto is defined as a character with motion inputs that has a strong projectile to control space, a DP move to take opponents out of the air, or in some games as a reversal tool, and some sort of move which is usually reserved for combos and more niche situations. They can also have multiple of these. Lastly, they usually have some good normals which cover a decent range, but don't usually have normals that are super broken. Of course, there is some variance between Shoto characters, but generally these are their main tools and are the focus of their game plan. These guys are intentionally designed to be simple to understand, and as such are usually mid-tier and pretty honest. Using this criteria, there's quite a number of Shoto characters in the Last Blade, which I have categorized using Tier Maker. This archetype consists of Power Akari, Power and Speed Kojiro, Power and Speed Kaede, and Power Yuki. Just as a little note, I'm lumping together Speed and EX because 9 times out of 10 they play like a slightly more defensive Speed character, so they usually land in the exact same category as their Speed counterpart. Let's quickly run through the list and see how each of these characters function compared to the usual Shoto type. P. Akari is known for her weird specials, but they don't usually see much use because more often than not, her more basic options are better since they offer more reward for less risk. She has a strong DP, which she can even convert into super, and the upper body invulnerability especially helps in anti-air situations and even reversal situations. She has a pretty decent projectile, but this is where we run into our first problem. The issue with her projectile is that its recovery is pretty long. More often than not, she ends up using it as a combo ender and nothing else, since going for it has the potential to backfire massively, even at longer ranges. On top of that, her combo game focuses way more on 4B than any particular special because of its powerful juggle potential, so her combo game is very different from the usual Shoto. Next, let's talk about Yuki. She's got a projectile which is slightly better than Akari's in terms of startup, but is still very vulnerable. Her DP is way worse too, being the slowest in the game on the B version, and has a serious case of SNK hitboxes on her A version. She has a special which is only for combos though, and despite her weaknesses, she ends up being one of the characters who plays the most like a proper Shoto. But that's not because her tools do it well, but rather the fact that it's all she can do. Yuki's best tool is easily her command grab, but even that's troublesome since its range is by far the worst in the game, or at least it feels that way. Kojiro is similar, but what she has over Yuki is an actually strong command grab, and much more consistent combos in both versions. P. Kojiro ends up playing more like a grappler than she does a Shoto, and the same could be said for Kaede, whose tools outside of his command grab are pretty weak. His projectile has the worst hitboxes out of all of the other Shoto types, and his air projectile hits mid, so it can't even be used for double overheads, which would actually be strong. Another theme among Shoto types is that DP moves aren't inherently powerful like they are in most other games due to the ability to air block. Baiting a DP with a neutral jump and punishing snuffs out most characters that have one, unless they have a good anti-air button to cover a bait. Kaede and Kojiro can both have a hard time dealing with this, while Yuki and Akari, especially Akari, have pretty good anti-air options outside of their DPs. All of these traits culminate in two different styles of Shoto, one specific to Akari and the other for the rest. Akari has Shoto tools, but focuses mostly on covering the neutral with her really good buttons and pokes, rather than most of her specials, and the other versions focus on using command grabs to open opponents more than trying to hold ground with their balanced kit. From this group alone, we can already point out two of the biggest contributing factors as to why these characters that would normally play like Shotos don't. Now, if you know a thing or two about Last Blade, you might be wondering why Awakened Kaede is in the Shoto category, but his alternate version, O-Kaede, isn't. Well, this is because O-Kaede does everything Awakened Kaede does, but worse. Well, everything but one. O-Kaede's greatest strength by far is his damage output. Because he has the most potent combos in the game, even being able to route around stun within tournament rules and touch of death the opponent, O-Kaede's main goal shifts from trying to poke the opponent and get some sneaky command grabs, to starting a loop by whatever means necessary. His inherently poor defensive capabilities make this pretty hard, but that's sort of what defines his playstyle. He has to be conservative until he gets that hit. This puts him in a new archetype known as the Glass Cannon, which is home to only one other resident, Power Setsuna. P Setsuna is generally stronger than O-Kaede in neutral because of his big buttons, but he lacks any mix-up game whatsoever, so his main strength is the fact that he can deal tons of damage and nothing else. Think of him as a more rounded version of O-Kaede. His peaks aren't as high, but his lows aren't as low. Given how much stronger offensive tools seem to be, you may be thinking that Rushdown is the strongest archetype in the game, and you'd be right. The majority of the cast fits into this archetype, but that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a good defensive character. It just means that the requirements to be a defensive character are different from most other games. If defensive specials aren't going to cut it, you're going to need defensive normals, so good disjoints, big anti-air buttons, and a kit that assists in keeping opponents away is what you need. The most iconic defensive character is Power Hibiki, who uses her large normals, high poke damage, and long-range specials to keep the opponent away. That doesn't mean that defense is the only thing that she's good at though. She also happens to have the easiest cross-up button in the game with JB. Other defensive characters which I classified as hit and run are Power Moria and Power Washizuka. Power Moria can't afford to be in your face as much as Speed Moria due to the nature of power, so he usually sees more defensive application of his teleports, using it to disengage opponents. Combine that with his long range and he can become quite the nightmare to approach. Power Washizuka is mostly here because his offensive capabilities and power aren't very strong, so he generally has to be more patient than your average character. Lastly, we're going to talk about the Grappler archetype, which is honestly the archetype which is closest to its usual playstyle. Juzo and Shigen mostly want to throw you, although Speed and EX Shigen don't have to focus on that quite so hard, since they have other tools that are just as powerful. But there is one guy in this archetype which may come as a surprise, that being Power Okina. Given how Okina's kit is designed, it seems like he was meant to be a zoner, using his turtles, teleport, and long-range command grabs to pressure from a distance, but again, projectiles are very, very weak, and so this game plan usually falls apart after one wrong move. Instead, he usually ends up focusing on his shockingly amazing jabs and tick throw potential, since it's way more consistent. There are a few characters I didn't mention in this video, and those guys are the ones that are the most difficult to categorize, since they tend to focus on their pokes more than any other character, and in most cases it's because the rest of their tools are just simply worse. The only real exception to this is Power Amano, who excels at this game plan because his pokes are very strong, lead to extremely high damage, build way more meter than they probably should, and are very disjointed. You could claim that he would fit better in the Glass Cannon area, but honestly his defensive options aren't even bad, like, at all. There's a reason why he's solidly in the top 5. So, in conclusion, the reason why archetypes are so weird in Last Blade 2 is a combination of anti-air specials not being as strong as other games due to air blocking, minus a few exceptions like Kagame's DP, which is air unblockable on the first hit, and because projectiles are extremely weak and easy to punish. The only projectile that isn't pretty bad is Koryu's, and when I say it isn't pretty bad, I mean it's nearly impossible to counterplay in certain matchups, creating 9-1 or even potentially 10-0 matchups, almost single-handedly. Of course, if you disagree with me on like any of this, that's perfectly fine. Like I said, I'm not actually super amazing at this game yet, and I may not be the most qualified to talk about it, but it's something that's been nagging me ever since I started playing the game. Honestly, these traits are what make this game feel so unique, and I think it would be significantly more generic without them. So even if I'm wrong about some of these things, there's still definitely something about this game's design that causes characters to play in weird ways, and I wouldn't have it any other way. As always, thanks for watching. Our Discord is down in the description. We hold Last Played 2 weeklies every Thursday, and we're now running Garou weeklies on Sundays, at least for a couple weeks, so join us if you're interested. I'll see you all in the next video.